Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the Alumni Volunteer Summit, and welcome to those that have joined us this morning. We had a fantastic day yesterday, and we're up for another great day today. I think I've actually crossed paths with most of you in the room. For those that I have not, my name is Sue Bates, ArtSci 91, and I currently serve... Not 96, as they... Yes. Makes me 5 years younger, but no, I'm a proud 91. We're the sesqui year, so... and I currently serve on the QUA Board of Directors as EVP, Volunteer Recruitment and Recognition. Before I introduce our wonderful speaker this morning, I would like to draw your attention to the special thank you cards on your desks with information about National Volunteer Week. For those unfamiliar, National Volunteer Week is a nationwide effort to recognize, celebrate, and thank Canada's 13.3 million volunteers, of which all of you are an important part. The week runs from April 6th through April 12th, and as volunteer leaders, we encourage you to take a moment next week and thank your volunteer teams. Also, make sure to visit the Celebrating Volunteers section of the Queen's Alumni Volunteer Opportunities Directory. You'll find there a special slideshow which will also be showcased at tonight's gala. So as EVP of Volunteer Recruitment and Recognition, please allow me to thank all of you, my fellow volunteers, who give so much of your time and talent to Queen's through the branches, reunions, the QUA board, University Council, and often more than one of those. Now, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce you to our speaker this morning, Bhavana Varma, CEO of the Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington United Way. I first had the pleasure of meeting Bhavana through Imagine Kingston, a wonderful group of community leaders right here in the city. I've also had the distinct pleasure of volunteering with Bhavana at the United Way for the past few years, and it's been a fantastic experience. At the United Way, Bhavana works with a large team of staff and volunteers on resource development and community impact. With community partners, Bhavana has introduced initiatives like Success by Six and has led shared community plans for poverty reduction, homelessness, and youth homelessness. Bhavana herself is an active volunteer and mentor, as well as a trained facilitator. She is a member of the United Way of Canada President's Advisory Council and was recently invited to participate in the International United Way Executive Leadership Development Program. She was the only leader in Canada invited to do so. Bhavana has been recognized for her contributions with the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal, as well as the QUA Kingston Branch Jim Bennett Achievement Award. Bhavana is an incredible asset to the Kingston community, and I am so pleased she's with us today. My fellow volunteers, Bhavana Varma.
Thank you. It's challenging when the introduction is actually longer than your presentation, isn't it? It's so lovely to be here amongst all of you volunteers. So firstly, thank you for volunteering. I know some of you volunteer with other organizations as well, and thank you for that. Thank you on behalf of Queens for all that you do, and thank you, Sue and Sarah, for making me feel so special coming out today. You've been really great at facilitating the process, making sure I knew what time to show up and what I was supposed to say, so thank you for that. Today I'm going to give you a few highlights. This is your session, so feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, ask questions. It's a half-hour presentation, I understand, so I'll try to leave some time for questions at the end. I'll give you some information. I'll try to share my personal experience. One caution, I do speak really fast, and I have a volunteer who speaks faster than me, and she told me just tell them to listen faster, so just listen faster. So. She's out back. So just to follow up on Sue's points, as we see, 13.3 million Canadians contribute 2 billion hours, and that's the equivalent of 1 million jobs. They typically contribute 156 hours per year, and as we all know from experience, that means some are probably giving 1,000 plus hours, and some are probably giving a couple, and all are just as important. 47% of Canadians volunteer, but what really excited me was that 58% of young Canadians volunteer, and that's really important because that just shows how committed you are to making a difference, and I see many of you around the room who are 15 to 24, right, Barb? So, And again, to facilitate the process, we have volunteer centers across Canada who kind of help people find volunteer opportunities. One of the things we've also learned is that volunteers today are goal-oriented and a lot more autonomous than in the old days. I remember a time I've been around with the not-for-profit sector when I joined, when I came to Canada. I was a very reluctant immigrant, did not want to be here. My husband kind of turned to me, said, do you want to go to Canada? And I said, no, and somehow we showed up in Hamilton, Ontario, of all places. And I just joined the United Way by chance. 24 years ago, I was 10 probably when I started. We had, the United Way was actually what impressed me the most because it was one way to make a difference. I volunteered with other organizations that I met through the United Way because, again, it was a way to make a difference. But in those days, it was different. When you had a volunteer, you had them, like in St. Catharines, where I started. We had the 3 auto plans. So the volunteer effort just rotated. Either the general manager plant manager was the chair of the campaign, and he actually got 6 months off the job. His secretary wrote the letters. They just ran the campaign. Then it rotated the next year to the next auto plan. That doesn't happen anymore. Now volunteers say, I have 2 hours. This is what I want to do. You tell me whether you can give me this opportunity or not. And that's a challenge for us who are used to the old days. So we have to adapt because you come to us and you say, I want this experience, I have 2 hours, it looks good on my resume, or I really want to make a difference, I want to start a new charity and I want to know how to do it now, so I want the experience to go there. And these are real life conversations that we've had with people. So it's different. And we as a not-for-profit are still working on that and trying to get familiar with the new concept of volunteers not coming to us with what we want them to do, but coming to us telling us what experience they want to. It's an experiential piece. So that's one of the trends we've seen that's different. The other thing is they're looking for volunteer tasks that involve something different from their work life. How many of you are finance accountants in that side? Okay, wherever you go, they're going to make you treasurer. I guarantee you that. And I had this wonderful volunteer who was so brilliant. Of course, we approached them, and of course, he joined our board. He was on the finance committee. Finally, he turned around and told me, you know, I do this all day long. I crunch numbers. I do budgets. I can't stand it in my off time. I want to do something else. So we actually started having a conversation about what he wanted to do. Turned out he was one of the most creative, friendly, personable. Not that accountants aren't known to be personable, but he turned out to be one of the most fun volunteers I worked with, and we did not leave him on the finance committee. We found some really wonderful ways to engage him. So again, try to find something that may not be what they do in their real jobs all the time. Again, why people volunteer is different. As I've said, some come for the experience, some come because they want to change the world and they want to know how to do it. Some come because it's just something their friend told them they should do. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But again, what we like is that more new Canadians are seeking volunteer opportunities. As we know, we are getting an influx of people coming to Canada. And like me, a lot of them are looking for ways to integrate into the community. And because our job experience doesn't always count, our professional development doesn't always count, volunteerism is a great way to invite people to get to know the community and learn more about working in Canada. So one of the things that it's important to think about is, why do you think it's important that we have volunteers? What is the benefit? Isn't it easier to do it yourself? Really? Really? Why do you think we have volunteers? Sue?
I should know this as EVPR March.
Yeah, just
Engaging your community.
yes. What do they add? What benefits?
Creativity, enthusiasm, unpaid labor.
Yeah. Sorry? Experience, knowledge, absolutely. One of the things that I really enjoy, again in my 20s, it's a disease. One of the things that I really enjoy is that I, as the CEO of the United Way in Kingston, don't have all the answers. I pretend I do, but I actually don't. And so what really helps me is that I can turn to volunteers and get the most wonderful advice, guidance, counsel with no self-interest. People just want to help. So again, volunteers add so much. They have a diversity of thought. One of the things that we know, and my husband reminded me about this, was, you know that show, how many of you knew about that, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where they ask you questions? Apparently a best success rate was not calling the expert, but it was actually asking the crowd. Because collective wisdom is actually one of the best ways we can actually make decisions. So a collective group of volunteers end up making the best decision because they debate the ins and outs, the pros and cons, and they come at it differently. So again, having volunteers adds that. So when I make decisions, because the volunteers challenge me, push me, question me, just make me articulate a little better what I'm trying to do, it helps the organization with better decisions. The skills and experience, absolutely, it's wonderful. The enthusiasm. One of the things that's not here, and it's one that I personally, the reason that I love working with volunteers is they motivate me. They keep me in the days when it's really a grind, and it's tough in the not-for-profit world, right? We don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of time. But what really is wonderful is how they motivate me, because they're giving of themselves. They're doing it for all kinds of reasons, but a lot of it is altruism. It's about changing the world, making a difference. They remind me why I do what I do in my real world. So again, it's a wonderful way, and I cannot imagine working in the private sector. Not that I haven't been tempted sometimes when I look at my paycheck, but really, the private sector, I would miss this wonderful volunteer effort, and that's what motivates me. The challenge is losing control. I'm a control freak. I don't even make excuses or pretend I'm not. I am a control freak. I like knowing how my day is going to run. You know how they do the Myers-Briggs test? I'm the one that actually plans the day. My husband, on the other hand, is not. So we've come to a compromise. In the morning when we go on vacation, mornings is my time. I plan which museums, what time, where we're going to have lunch, and in the afternoons we just wander around and do whatever we want. So again, with volunteers, you lose control, because they do not always do everything you tell them to do. They do not always show up when they're supposed to. Life happens. When I work with volunteers, I always allow 10% slippage. 10% of my volunteers are not going to come through, and that's a good day. So again, finding a way, finding plan B. I have plan B, C, D, E, F, G, especially for events. The reliability. Life happens. Things happen. Students sleep in. Students don't show up. The bus didn't show up. That was late. There are all kinds of excuses. There are all kinds of reasons. The time demands for volunteer supervision. As I said, sometimes it's easier to just do it yourself, and yet it is so much more enriching when we actually find the time to share with volunteers and learn from them. Recruiting enough qualified volunteers, this is always a challenge, especially for smaller agencies who may not have the profile, who may not have the budget, who may not actually have a volunteer coordinator. For them, finding volunteers can be a challenge. And the other piece is finding the right fit for volunteers. This is one of the most key pieces, because so often we just take it for granted that what we ask them to do, because based on our observations, is what they're going to be good at. I'll give you another example. We had this wonderful volunteer. When I first came to Kingston, Kingston was a bit of a mess, so I was Mary Poppins, hired to clean up things and fly away, but I never flew away. And we had this wonderful volunteer who for years had been coming in every Tuesday to do our receipts. And one day I just happened to chat with her. I had coffee in my hand, I stopped at her desk and I started chatting. And I found that she had the most amazing experience, insight. She was a delight to work with. So we got her into committees, got her onto the board. She actually was instrumental in bringing Success by 6. She completely revamped our fund distribution process as a board member. But we had not found the right fit for her. She'd come into our office, and what did we do? Give her receipts to do. And that's a learning for me. Try to understand where they really want to be, what they really want to do. And that, again, is something that most of us who manage volunteers or work with volunteers need to find the time to understand what's the right fit. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, I think. So what I'm going to do is to give you some time to just brainstorm in groups on one reason you think people like to volunteer, and one reason why you think they would walk away. And use your own personal experiences if you'd like, but just one thing. So maybe you can just find whatever's most convenient. Okay, so it's great that you had so much to chat about. That's wonderful. So let's start with the group at the back. One reason why you think people volunteer.
So our main reason is they have a good relationship with the group of the community that we're working with, their engaged, their what they expect they would get from that day. So I think it's all about relationships.
Great. And what will make them walk away?
You're saying because their time is so limited, there's tons of opportunities out there, whether it's geographically or skill set. So I think, they'll find other opportunities for things that come up in their lives.
Right.
Just maintain that.
Thank you. Your group?
So we said that probably the primary reason why people volunteer is to meet other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we got involved in volunteering.
Yeah.
It's really great. And why they dislike, we said not understanding the purpose of that volunteer experience. Like, what does this community do? What is the purpose? Why am I volunteering? So if that's not clear, then at least the whole thing.
Okay. And your group?
Okay, one that you haven't mentioned yet, just giving back, sense of gratitude and wanting to be engaged in an issue that matters. And why they would be unhappy is the organization fails to thank them.
Okay, so let's go to the back. Yeah.
One that disciplines that was the career building.
Career
So people
building.
could learn a new
Yeah.
skill and let's face it, as you mentioned, resume building.
Yeah.
A lot of the savvy people. And one that hasn't been mentioned is disorganized. You get there and they don't have everything organized and they just say, oh, stand over there and, greet people.
That's a good one. Okay. George, your group?
Sure. One of the things we said was being able to get a different experience, almost like a second life, as Sebastian mentioned. And one of the reasons why we think they might become disenchanted with the experience would be if either they don't get that opportunity to develop a separate set of skills that they normally use, or if they're being essentially told to do something that they don't find fulfilling.
Good. And this group?
So one of the reasons why people want to volunteer is, other than having kind of a second life, would be providing or giving back to an organization that they have strong beliefs in or close to their heart. And why they would not want to volunteer anymore is potentially just lack of vision for the organization. Right.
I guess two sides to it. Why they come is engagement with other people, and why they leave is they don't become engaged with people that are currently in that organization.
Sure. We'll be back. Jess?
So we talked about sort of just giving back and also being drawn in by friendships and just to set roots, I guess, in a community, those sorts of things. And what can draw people away would be, we talked about red tape, for instance, how you can make all the biggest impact right from the beginning.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of things that we talked about were also mentioned, but in addition, in terms of what makes their experience not great is that oftentimes that there's a pre-formed clique. So if you get on a board or a committee, that existing are all best friends with each other, and so you kind of don't really have a place to fit in. So that's pretty key.
That's a good one. At the back?
We said much the same thing. Two of us identified that we left boards because of maverick board chairs.
Okay. Good one. Watch out, right.
What kind of groups do you belong to?
People who change meeting times and expect everybody to be there and run very,
You hear that, George? You told me I didn't hear that.
Okay. Paul?
We identified the potential for positive outcomes as the main reason for getting involved, and talked about a lot of the other things here. And the corollary of that would be the leave because we weren't accomplishing goals. But if I might just add, you talked about generational issues, and I think it is really very, very clear because none of what us older set talked about had anything to do with career building or the experience for us. It's a very different reason why we get into volunteering.
And I think we're positioning volunteering differently in this new generation. We're encouraging people to volunteer. One of the reasons we're giving is to get experience, to learn, So, did I miss any group? Okay. So here's what some of the things we've heard, and many of these are covered. Help others have fun, new skills, professional training. For example, some of our volunteers who volunteer at Fair for Friends get the Smart Serve course, so they can serve liquor anywhere. So I'm just kidding. There are lots of other professional certifications that people acquire. Test out career options, work experience. It's a great way because a lot of not-for-profits actually end up hiring volunteers because it's so much easier. We don't have money to advertise. They've had a month-long interview with us when they worked with us, volunteered with us, so that's one way. Personal leadership, be part of a team, make new friends, be recognized, and a lot of it is what you say because you were asked, because your friends asked you to join. Why they walked away, the list as you see is a little longer. Time, of course, finding the right volunteer role, and we heard that. Feeling guilty, sometimes agencies have higher expectations and then people are willing to commit. Office conflict, organizational conflict was a big one that we've heard. And again, it's come out in some ways, the maverick board chair, a clique of people in the organization, even staff confiding in volunteers on internal politics tends to turn volunteers off. Discover you're in the wrong place, you signed up to help kids and you end up stuffing receipts in the back room. That's not what you signed up for. You need to pull out, you're burning out, your family's telling you to come home because they need you more than the organization. No clear boundaries or role definition, that's a big one too. And also that the organization sometimes doesn't listen to volunteers when they tell people how to do things a certain way, but the organization's always done it a certain way. So working with volunteers, one of the things that's important to recognize when you work with volunteers, with fellow volunteers, is that motivation changes. The reason someone walked in your door might be different. And I'll give you a personal example of, we walked into, as you know, United Way runs workplace campaigns. And one of the first steps in a workplace campaign is to walk into the CEO, the head of the organization, to say, who's going to run your campaign for you? And I remember one time, it wasn't in this community, we walked into the police chief's office and he was so excited about the campaign, big, tall, Scottish guy, and he said, okay, we've got the perfect person for you. He introduced us to this person who's going to run the campaign, who's going to lead the campaign, and as soon as he walked out the door, she turned to us and says, I don't believe in the United Way. I don't give. I'll pass out the pledge forms. I've been voluntold, and so be it. And I was like, okay, first thing I want to do was go and just beat up the police chief, which is not possible. Like, what were you thinking? This is really important to our community. We have to raise money, and why did you pick this person? But we worked with her to understand her motivation, to understand what resonated with her. We found out that she actually had another organization that she believed in. So we talked about the designations. We talked about kids. We took her on tours, showed her where the kids were being helped. And it turned out that she was one of our best volunteers in a lot. It just is a matter of motivating them, understanding where their motivation comes from, and recognizing that people can change along the way. So again, if sometimes people will volunteer for kids programs, but as things happen in their life and then they're the middle generation, sandwich generation, they find that they're more engaged in seniors issues with their parents, and then they switch to seniors organizations. So things change. Don't assume that a volunteer who signs up for one thing is going to stay there forever and their life is on hold while you're continuing to expect the same things from them. It's about building relationships. Some of my best friends have actually come from volunteers I've worked with. They really, you spend so much time together, you have so many shared experiences, you have meals together. It's all the things that form a bit. You have glasses of wine together. It's what forms the basis for a good relationship. I'm just kidding about the drinks and wine, The United Way does not endorse. I say the same thing every day. Watch for people under the radar screen. Recognize their commitments and abilities, because sometimes it's the quiet people in the corner who are thinking, who may not have a chance. One of the other things I learned was, and this was just from that course that I've just started, the Executive Leadership Development course, apparently when you ask a question, you're supposed to wait 12 seconds to get an answer from some people, because some people like to think. And an extrovert, which I turned out to be, waits 2 to 3 seconds. So now I'm at the 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm up to 5. But really, sometimes we miss the volunteers under the radar who have some really astute observations, because most of us, and in the not-for-profit world, especially in the United Way, a lot of us are extroverts. A lot of leaders are extroverts. So again, we have to train ourselves to watch for people in the corner who have the most wonderful, thoughtful observations, who don't think out loud like we do. So again, that's something that we've all learned. The other thing one of my friends told me about was volunteers lend you their reputation. So when we recruit a campaign chair to stand up and stand for us, they are lending their reputations. And if that's all they do, their job is almost done, because that is so important. They are standing up and saying, this is a reliable organization. I have committed to it. I am standing up and telling you. So our job is not to let them down. And that's really important to us. We also find, and I'm going to share a story that one of the first times we recruited the base commander in Kingston to be our campaign chair. When he was leaving, this is Guy Thibault, and he's now the second in command in the military. When he was leaving at his the parade that they have when base commanders leave, he stood up and he said, he talked about the United Way and what a wonderful experience he was. And then he says, I might be the colonel, but Bhavana is the general. She tells me what to do. And I was mortified. Here are all the leaders in the community, and he is telling me that I am a bossy person, which I know it's now called being a leader. What was he thinking? So afterwards at the reception, I turned to him and I said, Guy, come on, in front of everyone, you embarrassed me like you told him. He says, no, it's true. I don't have time to think about all this. I have told you to take care of things. I trust you. You tell me what to do, and I do it because I know you know this better than I don't have time to figure out what needs to be done. So there. So anyway, that I recovered from that. But they are lending you their reputations. And it's really important that we treat them with care and recognize that. All of you are here. Because you're here, you are raising the credibility of the organization, and that's an important thing to remember. This is a simple planning cycle that most people know. It never ends. You're always looking, recruiting, training, supporting volunteers. Some things that we've heard about, and we'll address a few of them, is in volunteer management, recruitment, retention, succession planning, and I know you have a course coming up or a workshop coming up on succession planning. One of the things we've heard, has anyone heard this? A few volunteers do all the work? Yes. Yes? Yeah, that's one that comes up a lot. And then again, dealing with difficult volunteers. Of course, volunteers are never difficult, at least not the ones in this room. But those other people out there, some of them can be a bit challenging. So we'll talk about a few of these. So where do you think you can find volunteers? Queens, it's easy. You'll look around Queens and you'll find volunteers. But let's say you're with a not-for-profit. Where would you find a volunteer? You have no budget. You actually don't have a volunteer coordinator. Where do you think you'll find volunteers? Networks, that's it. And that's what volunteers bring. They bring, it's not just who the staff knows, it's who other volunteers know. Our board, for example, we recruit from existing volunteers because we don't necessarily want to bring someone directly onto our board who doesn't understand what's happening and they may let us down. So we try to find people who are already volunteering with us in different ways and start to graduate them. The role definition, people have talked about how important it is to find the right role because people walk away. If you do not give them the right match, if you get an accountant to be on the finance committee and they tell you they don't want to be, you're putting them in a spot that they don't want to be. So finding the right fit, what they're looking for, understanding it, recognizing that their motivation is going to change along the time, in the time they're with you. And also evolving roles. One of the things with the United Way, I don't know if you've ever volunteered with the United Way, probably the same with Queens, is we're the mafia. You can never leave us. We'll find you. We'll hunt you down. There's this joke about the person on an island who's laying back, and the two of them panicking. They've been shipwrecked on an island, and one of them is lying back with his hands behind his head, and the other one saying, "Aren't you panicking? You're trying to do smoke rings and everything." And the guy says, "Don't worry. I'm a United Way chair. They'll find me." So again, finding the right fit, what people want to do. What are they hoping to get out of the experience? So often we as a not-for-profit or as organizations tend to look at what we want from people. What is it we want right now? You walked in the door, oh yeah, I need a volunteer to manage this event. That's maybe not what you came in for. So we have to slow down and find what they want out of the experience and what we want for them to get out of the experience. So for us, the act of volunteering is important, but the act of engaging is even more important because most of our longtime volunteers have come to us from different roles, different positions within the organization. Some were voluntold as a police officer, but others have come voluntarily, but it's important for us to keep them engaged so they better understand and they make a difference in the organization. One of the things we've talked about briefly was the not controlling thing, so I'm learning really hard not to control. I'm kidding, I'm actually not so bad. providing them with the resources that they need. It's no different from actually managing staff, managing employees. You have to do the same things. You motivate them, help them to achieve potential, find things, help them develop the way they want to, and make sure it's a rewarding experience for all. And the other thing is helping volunteers move on. How many of you have fired a volunteer? Wasn't easy, was it? No, it is one of the most difficult things because people come to you voluntarily, but actually it's important to let them go if it's not meeting your needs or their needs. And some of them will be grateful to you. They've been just waiting for it to come. They were relieved when you actually came up to them and gave them an out. And again, as Sun Tzu says in The Art of War, always let your enemies find a safe face. So again, not that they're your enemies, but it's important to let volunteers save face when they leave your organization. It's their reason. Talk to them about how you understand what's happening in their life and why they couldn't come up with the reasons to complete their fulfill their the promises they made. But again, it's one of the most tough things, one of the few things that I do not enjoy about my job. The equitable distribution of work. Now, I saw a few hands go up about that. How do you feel about that? That some volunteers do all the work and others don't. When it comes time to raise their hand, there's some will always raise their hand and others will sit on their hands. Anyone feel badly about that? Any thoughts?
I think that's just the nature of small groups.
Yeah.
When people step forward in certain situations.
Others just don't. Yeah.
I think it's beyond just the nature of small groups. I think it's the nature of life. In your work life, there will always be the people that jump in to, give the extra bit, and those that somehow manage to sit on their hands whenever there's an opportunity to pitch in. But it's the same as your families as well. I like Kim's comment of volunteering is a disease, that some people have a more aggressive form of disease that causes their hand to go up every single time.
Yeah.
I think it's also what their passion is. So there are organizations I sit with and I sit on my hand, and other ones that I just can't say yes enough. So
Okay. That's a good point.
How engaged you are.
Great.
I think sometimes it's structural though. So I was on a board for a few years where the executive committee of the board started doing more and more work. And then after a couple of years, we realized, you know what, we should stop really having an executive committee, or if we have one, just have its tasks be very well defined so that work can be spread around the whole board.
Yeah.
Because you just sort of, and the executive committee started getting burned out and saying, well, we're doing all the work and no one else is chipping in. Well, of course, because
we do it.
We're meeting every month, and they're meeting 4 times a year, right?
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Yes.
I think, especially with new volunteers, sometimes it could be a confidence issue too. So if you have a core of people who are very familiar with the organization, someone new might be more hesitant to, might be quite capable, but more hesitant to put their hand.
And even the 12-second thing, right?
Yeah.
Waiting for that.
I think sometimes one of the problems that you have to manage as somebody who's recruiting or working with volunteers is to not say no to somebody who volunteers all the time. So the person that puts their hand up all the time, you have to balance saying no to them sometimes and discouraging them too, because if you say, well, I look for volunteers, 4 people put their hands up, and you say, oh, well, not you 3, but this guy, right? And so the other 3 eventually they stop putting their hands up. So there's a balance to distributing the work and not discouraging the people who do have a big passion.
Yeah.
And it's a hard job.
Absolutely. You're right, because you know they'll do it. Yes.
I think it's a challenge for staff sometimes too to not get sort of trapped with a small pool of people that you know are going to do a really good job.
It's the comfort
and to
level.
keep returning to the same.
Absolutely. We're all guilty of that, right? Because we know they'll do it. We trust them. We know them well enough. But it's important to spread it out. Yeah. Good. But I think one of the most important things is recognizing that all volunteers are not equal. The motivation's different. There are things. What about difficult volunteers? Never happens.
Difficult volunteers aren't necessarily difficult. They're passionate about something but coming at it from a different perspective. And I think you gave an example is if you can sort of pack where they're coming from and what their motivations are, then often there's a passion. You just have to help sort of redirect it towards the common goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And life is like that. There are some people who are difficult, but again, one of the important things is however you classify difficult, whether it's not working for your organization or you personally, don't believe it's like with employees or with other things that are happening in your life. The problem will go away. It'll get better. They'll quit on their own if you make it hard enough. I can fix the problem. I can cover it up. it'll, all those reasons that we give ourselves, it's really important for the organization to really look at what's happening, have conversations with the volunteer, and then see if they have a solution. So a lot of times they'll tell you exactly what's happening, why. We had this committee, and there was this one volunteer who every time anyone suggested anything went, yeah, but. There were 100 reasons why we could not go a step further. And it was a long meeting. Like at the end of 2 hours, everyone was worn out. And finally, I turned to her and said, okay, tell us what you would do. She had a brilliant solution, thought through, and I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me at the start? But anyway, she had it all worked out. So again, it's important to talk to volunteers to understand what they think. Maybe they don't like the processes you're using. Maybe they don't like the timing of the meetings. Maybe they just feel it can be done differently. So ask them what the solution is. Maybe they feel there's another job that they would rather have done, that this is not the committee they wanted. Reassign if possible. But otherwise, again, as I said before, allow them to save face if they decide to leave, and make it easy for them to leave. Help appreciate the challenges happening in their lives and let them leave in a good way. Succession planning, we all have lists of people we've spotted in our mind. I always note when someone says, not this year, 2 years from now, 2 years from now, I'm back at their door. In the meantime, I've given them information for the remaining time just to make sure that they knew what we were up to. Keep spotting people, know the skills you want. And that's really difficult for us because sometimes we just take the nearest warm body. How many of you have done that? Easiest recruit, right? Someone right there, handy, easy to recruit. It's really important to see what you're looking for, whether you're looking for leadership skills, whether you're looking for a hands-on person, whether you're looking for particular skills or experience, and keep spotting people. Constantly look for people, talk to them, test them out, test them out in smaller roles, see if it works for them, see if it works for you, and then you can move them up to more responsible roles. That way they don't feel they're letting you down and you don't feel they've let you down. And again, accept if they say no. So many people say, oh, it's just a piece of cake. It's only 2 calls, and then they come and it expands to 5 calls, and then 10 calls, and then it becomes a whole different thing. All of us have been caught in that trap, and all of us at some point have hopefully had that conversation to the agency, say, this is not what I signed up for. This is what I had thought this meant, and it appears that the job is a little larger than I had said yes to. But again, make sure that it's very clear. I'm just going to close with this. What about recognition? How many of you have had a time or a gesture that made you feel really special and appreciated? Anyone? Okay, yeah, Saudi.
There's an opportunity. I was volunteering with somebody, and they sort of, after a meeting, came back and sort of tagged me in the hall and was just like, hey, I really appreciated how you championed that one piece of one we were talking at work. And it was a moment that afterwards I was like, awesome. Yeah. And then I carried on with the rest of my day, but just having that little flicker, it felt really good. It was a motivating moment for me for sure.
Right. There was another hand there?
Just to go from that, I think it's really important the timing when you recognize to make sure that you do it right after.
Instant gratification. Yeah.
That's
That's really key. Yeah, there's some hands here. Yeah.
Jeremy did that for me in a recent article in the Alumni Review. I just did what I do. I went and welcomed him at an event that he was new at. Years later, he mentions that in an article as being pivotal, and I'll go and do it to 20 more people now.
Jeremy, you had your hand up too?
Queens does a fantastic job recognizing volunteers.
Yeah. Yes, right.
There were some hands here too. Anyone else? This side? Yeah. Jess?
This is something that might be useful for people in their other volunteer lives as well. In Ontario anyways, there's the Ontario Volunteer Recognition Awards, and so if you've volunteered for 5 years or 10 years, 15, 20, your charity or whoever you're volunteering with can nominate you, and there's a series of special events with ministers and so on. You get a pin and a certificate. So a really nice way to, out of the blue, thank a volunteer from and recognize them external to your organization, because often when you have a volunteer organization, they're also charitable, not-for-profit, and there's not the $1 million budget to thank the volunteers. So it's a really nice way. So you may be able to use it in some of your other volunteer activities as well.
Right. Any other examples? Yes.
We're on an awards dinner, and the recipient for last year's dinner wrote a lovely letter to all of the members of the community and sent it with a really lovely book that he
thought was very, it was this like 900-page thing of like Champlain's dream, but it was a lovely message in about how he thought that we would enjoy it. And it was a really nice touch for him to come back and say thank you for all the work that you did on this award committee for me and the award.
I'm still planning to read it and write him back, saying what I thought. But then my summer job was lovely.
Anyone else? And so often, what we as not-for-profits tend to do is to give them a plaque and tell them to go away. It's really important to think of little things. It's the little gestures that make all the difference in people's lives. And it's so important to recognize most volunteers we've learned are not looking for that big. The plaques are important, but that's not what they're doing it for. So it's important to make them feel recognized, wanted, appreciated. And I hope all of you enjoy your many years of volunteering that are ahead of you. So thank you very much.
Note of recognition, we would like to thank you so much with a small token of our appreciation for such a wonderful, enlightening, interesting, very topical talk today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.